All right, so now I'm starting the chapter Charlemagne, who I believe will become Emperor Charlemagne. He is, in this image, a stained glass. This is at worldatlas.com. And yes, he has red hair for this. Now, other images that I wanted to show you really quickly before I left the Merovingian era, full stop. This is all about the armor, because I didn't really touch upon how flimsy it was, and I wanted to mention it. Because yes, by the end of all of their hundreds of years, they just almost tired of war, and they weren't really being stubborn at the borders and saying, oh, it's mine, and this, and maybe it had to do with the clothing and how they were adapting culturally, because it would have hurt, they're just out there in regular clothes here, and only beginning to have, well, of course they always had the hats, they always had the metal hats, but they didn't really have armor, maybe towards the end. And one more mention is the this is this is a big problem, is that it is the I'm in so much demand, for I make like $80 a day. But so I'm in a lot of demand for that $80. So I'm going to pause this. All right, actually that was good news. I just got a tip for $50. So now, and maybe this audiobook business of mine will come to fruition, and money will trickle from the sky for me. But if you notice now, a lot of the time, now in this particular book, I know we were talking about the armor, but in this particular book, they are not saying Carolingian ever. They are saying Carlovingian, which is completely different. And why there's this disparity and Carlo is missing off the internet, I have no idea. But it was a Carlovingian in this book in 1791. So maybe Carol became more important. Or they thought, well, it's the easier way to sell history. We can't sell a Carlo. We can sell a Carol. But maybe Carol goes along with singing and blah blah blah, but in the book it's Carlovingian, and still keeping with the Vingian. Now note, even in Charlemagne's time, big change here. We're having a big change from this Vingian to the next Vingian. The Carlovingian, all of a sudden, armor, real metal armor, in abundance. So definitely they started forging a lot more. Even though there was wealth and riches prior, this particular era, Carlo. All right. We're in 769 AD. Pepin, aware of the superior talents of his son Charles, had bequeathed him Austrasia from a consciousness that the restless spirit of the German nations and the unsettled state of affairs in Italy would afford him an ample field for the display of his courage. According to this division, Carloman was to have Burgundy, Provence, Languedoc, Alsace, a part of Germany, and of Aquitaine. So now he has quite a bit Aquitaine. But such is the neglect of ancient authors that not a word is said of Neustria, one of the most valuable portions of the French Empire, the last will of the deceased monarch, however, was not fulfilled. The nobles, paying no attention to it, assembled in order to proceed to a new division of the realm, by which Neustria, Burgundy, Aquitaine were given to Charles, and Austrasia, with all French Germany, to Carloman. The two brothers were crowned the same day, the eldest at Noyon and the youngest at Soissons. In 770 AD, but the harmony that subsisted between them was speedily interrupted by the dictates of ambition. The first year of their reign a rupture took place, and Charles obtained possession of a part of Austrasia. Carloman was preparing to resent this injury, and the flames of war were on the point of desolating the empire, when their attention was attracted by another object of their mutual enmity. This was Hunald, the old Duke of Aquitaine, who suddenly, bursting from the fetters of a monastic life, which he had patiently borne for more than 20 years, assumed the garb of royalty, and was received by his subjects with the most unequivocal demonstrations of joy. The most important cities freely opened their gates to their long-lost sovereign. And conquest. The laborious achievement of several years was threatened to be overturned in a few weeks. Charles was sensible how much his own reputation was concerned to oppose the torrent. His entreaties persuaded the reluctant Carloman to take the field, but the forces of the royal confederates had fiercely formed a junction before the fickle prince withdrew. With the troops immediately attached to his standard, and left his brother to support alone the weight of the war. The commanding genius of Charles supplied the deficiency of his numbers. The Duke of Aquitaine, defeated in a decisive battle, escaped with difficulty to the territories of Lupus, Duke of Gascony, who surrendered him to his enemy. And the captive Hunald was dismissed to a prison. The success of Charles induced Didier, king of the Lombards. It seems like there's a Didier in every generation. I know. King of the Lombards, and Tassillon, Duke of Bavaria, who had planned hostilities against him, to forego their designs. The former endeavoured to secure the friendship of the youthful monarch by a double alliance. He had a son and a daughter. The former he proposed to marry to the Princess Giselle, sister to Charles, and the latter to Charles himself, though he was already married to Hilmitrude, by whom he had a son. This consideration, however, was inadequate to make him desist from the pursuit of a plan whence he convinced so many advantages must ensue. A negotiation was accordingly entered into, and notwithstanding the violent opposition of the Pope, who in his holy invective against the Lombards reapproached them with the first stain of leprosy, terminated in the repudiation of Hilmatrude and the conclusion of the projected marriage. But Charles soon rejected his new wife on account of some secret infirmities, which prevented her from bearing children, and transferred the title and rank of queen to Hildegard, who was descended from a noble Suevian family. In the midst of these transactions, in 771, Carloman died at Samancy, near Léon, and was interred at the Abbey of Saint-Rémy at Rheims. He left 2 sons, Pepin and Siagre, but neither of them was permitted to succeed him, and the Austrasians, impressed with respect for the talents of Charles, acknowledged him for their sovereign. Gerberga, the widow of Carloman, trembling for the fate of her children, fled with them into Lombardy, where they were received with great affection by Didier, who was eager to embrace any opportunity of revenging the insult offered to his daughter. The court of Lombardy soon became an asylum for all the enemies of the French monarchy. Hunald, having escaped from prison, repaired thither, and several of the Austrasian nobles, disgusted with the government of Charles, took refuge with his enemy. Charles was not ignorant of these proceedings, but his immediate attention was called to another quarter. A revolt of the Saxons engaged him in a war. With some short intervals, exercised his persevering valor during 33 years. From the Rhine and beyond the Elbe. Well, I don't know if it lasted 33 years. I hope it didn't last that long. Anyway, he was 33 years old. From the Rhine and beyond the Elbe, the martial inhabitants of the north of Germany were still inimical to the government and religion of the French. They rejected with contempt the servile obligation of tribute, and in successive engagements displayed a ferocious courage which could only be repulsed by the veteran intrepidity. Oh no, intrepidity, it really is. Intrepidity of the troops of Charles. So the veteran fear, I suppose. The first war was occasioned by an eruption of the Saxons into the territories of France. Charles entered their country and laid waste all before him. Still, far from being intimidated, they offered him battle. But fortune proving unfavourable, they were...
Lost.
Oh my gosh, I had a real loud hoodoo there. Sorry. An audio. Okay. So here we are, finding their inability to resist. The Saxons sued from... Oh, no. There was more. They were intimidated. They offered him battle. Far from being intimidated, they're always very, very ballsy in a way, aren't they? And yet they've failed in all of these. They're trying to take over France again and again. They offered him battle, but fortune proving unfavourable, they were obliged to bend beneath the yoke of the victor. Town after town was taken. Their temples were demolished, and their idols broken in pieces. Finding their inability to, oh my gosh, resist the Saxons, sued for mercy and obtained it. Charles, having exacted them 12 hostages as a pledge of their future submission, returned home and prepared for an expedition into Italy. So again, a fail of the Saxons. Pope Stephen was dead in 773. He had been succeeded by Adrian, who, no sooner in possession of the papal dignity than he sent to the king of Lombardy to demand restitution of some places belonging to the patrimony of St. Peter, which he still retained. That prince, instead of sending an answer to his requisition, advanced towards Rome at the head of a powerful army. All right. And took with him the 2 sons of Carloman. So he's really heading off to Rome now. Remember, this was just France before. Do I have a good map of this? I was trying to find a map. Is this the map? Yeah, I have found the map. Okay, awesome. Now with this map, really, this is showing, this is the Charlemagne era, but now we haven't really spoken of Charlemagne so much. We're talking about Carloman and Pepin, and we're still speaking of Charles. Well, I guess Charles is Charlemagne in a way, but now they're calling him Charles. So we're really calling him Charles, aren't we? They're not overdoing it every minute and every sentence saying Charlemagne, Charlemagne. Perhaps he's not officially Charlemagne yet. But right now, he's up there in Saxonia. Do you see the bright green? That was his take. And then over here now he's heading down into Lombardy. And all before that was not the bright green, but the regular green was just the normal Merovingians, Vingians, Vigians, the viners. Well, yeah, it might be a type of wine, because if you think about it, there's also the Merlot wine, you know. So the Merovin, you know, may be very close to being a wine. A very good and delicious. Okay, so next we have, he is very happy, isn't he? Town after town, the temples were demolished. And he returned home, and now he's on an expedition to Italy. He's up there and he's got Saxonia. Now 773, Pope Stephen was dead and succeeded by Arian. That prince, instead of sending an answer, we've gone through all of this. I'm sorry, I don't want to repeat it. Yes, and on whom he wanted the Pope to confer the crown of Austrasia. This is with the head of the powerful army. He took with him the 2 sons of Carloman, on whom he wanted the Pope to confer the crown of Austrasia. But Adrian, being convinced that the only means of escaping from the domination of the Lombards was by securing the protection of the King of France, perverted in his refusal to crown the young princes, and profiting by his pretended mark of his attachment, his pretended mark of his attachment to Charles, he wrote the most pressing letters to that monarch to entreat he would march to his assistance. Charles, averse from engaging in this war, made such advantageous proposals to Didier that he began to imagine he was become formidable to the French monarch. Impressed with this idea, he rejected the proffered terms, and was soon surprised to hear that Charles was advancing at the head of such a powerful army, that it was evident he not only meant to assist the Pope, but to conquer the whole kingdom of Lombardy. He had skilfully evaded the fortified posts of the Alps. His presence dispersed the army of the Lombards, and while Didier, with the old Duke of Aquitaine, who had escaped from prison, took shelter in Pavia, his son Adelgif, with the widow and children of Carloman, sought immediate safety in Verona. Both cities were besieged at the same moment by the impatient activity of Charles. Verona was soon compelled to surrender. Adalgifi escaped to Constantinople. The widow and 2 sons of Carloman disappeared, and none of them were ever heard of after, till an account of the fate of Siagre, the eldest son, was received by the celebrated Bouzet, Bishop of Meaux, in an ancient manuscript. It was sent to him from the Abbey of Saint-Pons at Nice. P.O.N.S. This manuscript contained the life of that prince, written by a contemporary author, which, well, in his time it was contemporary, by which it appears that he persuaded his uncle to found the said convent, where he assumed the monastic habit and led such a life of sanctity that Pope Adrian was induced to take him from the convent and make him Bishop of Nice. He was afterwards canonized. So they think Carloman might have whisked himself off to the Abbey of Saint-Pons at Nice. Well, it's not bad. He was there by the ocean then. Okay, so at 774, Didier displayed great courage. Well, the Mediterranean. Great courage in the defense of his capital. The strength of the place, the abundance of everything that was necessary for a vigorous resistance, the number and bravery of the troops it contained, and lastly, the presence of the sovereign, who was fighting for his crown, all conspired to persuade Charles that its reduction would prove a work of considerable time. This determined him to convert the siege into a blockade and to pay a short visit to Rome. He was received by Adrian with the most grateful remarks of attention, but that artful Pope, in the midst of his civilities, did not forget his interest. The king having accompanied him to the church of St. Peter, Adrian conjured him to remember the donation which his father had made to it. Charles immediately ordered it to be read to him, and afterwards confirmed it with his mark, for though one of the most learned men of the age, he could not write. The only return which the king received for this pious offering was that code of the holy canons, which was used by the Roman Church. It comprised all those which Dionysius the Little had collected in the 6th century. That was to say, the 51st of those which are falsely attributed to the apostles, those of Nicaea, Ancyra, Neosepharia, Gangra, Antioch, Laodicea, Constantinople, Chalcedon, Sardis, and some African councils. To these were added the epistles of the popes from Siricius to Hormidicus. This code, this is very Greek, those ones. Siricius. This code with the letters of Gregory II and the false decretals composed by Isidorus was all that the ecclesiastical law which the French had till long after the commencement of the third race of kings. I'm going to go back just a little bit about this section. This code, they're talking about these, a specific code that was added the epistles of the popes. To these were added the epistles of the popes from Siricius to Hormidicus. This code with the letters of Gregory II and the false decretals composed by Isidorus was all the ecclesiastical law with which the French had till long after the commencement of the third race of kings. It is dedicated to the liberator of Rome. The preliminary epistle composed by Adrian is a poem in praise of Charles. Each verse begins with a letter of his name. The king, on his return to Pavia, pressed the siege with great vigour. The arms of the French were seconded by an internal enemy, and the ravages of the plague determined the inhabitants to implore the clemency of Charles. The old Duke of Aquitaine fell a sacrifice to his constancy in opposing the tumultuous clamour of the people. The gates were thrown open. The kingdom of the Lombards was finally extinguished, and their unhappy monarch Didier was sent to a convent in France, where he assumed the habit of a monk. At Milan, the victor was crowned King of Lombardy. Okay. So, on the ruins of Lombardy, a new monarchy was raised. Apparently, when they ransacked the whole town, they had to raise it up again. So on the ruins, which afterwards assumed the appellation of the Kingdom of Italy. It comprised not only Piedmont, the Duchy of Montserrat, the Republic of Genoa, the Duchies of Parma and Modena, Tuscany, the Milanese, Bresci, Verona, and Friuli. But all that country which Charles had given to the Pope, that is, the Exarchat of Ravenna, the Pentopolis, the Terracina, and the duchies of Spoleto and Benevento, the March of Ancona, the districts of Ferrara and Bologna. And if Anastasius, the librarian, may be credited the island of Corsica, the provinces of Venice and Istria, Mantua, and the Duchy of Reggio. But though Charles extended the papal dominions, he was careful to restrain the temporal authority of the Pope within due bounds. All affairs were conducted in Rome by the king's orders. The money coined there bore his impression. The public acts were dated according to the years of his reign. An appeal lay to his officers from all the sentences pronounced by the popes with the regard to their vassals. The sovereign pontiffs themselves had recourse to the justice of the French monarch in their own personal concerns. In 775, such was the state of affairs in Italy when Charles was summoned to repass the Alps, in order to restrain the destructive incursions of the Saxons, who had already reassumed their arms, and recovering Efrigberg near the Weser, which they had lost in the former campaign. That city, at the appearance of the French monarch, was again compelled to change its master, but a considerable detachment of French troops, appointed to guard the passages and separated from their companions by the broad stream of the river, was in the moment of heedless confidence overwhelmed by the crafty barbarians. This check, with new disturbances in Italy, induced Charles to receive, with hostages from different tribes, the doubtful possessions of the Saxons, and after strengthening the fortifications of Erisberg, he directed his march to the west. So yeah, there's quite a bit going on directly here in Italy over land, and apparently the Saxons now are rising up again, being troublesome. The clouds in 778 AD, which obscured Italy, and which had been swelled by the intrigues of the Emperor of the East and the fugitive Adolf, the son of Didier, were dispelled by the presence of the monarch. But the storm still shook the north with unabated violence, and the boasted works of Erisberg were swept away by the fury of the tempest. Charles, by his rapid return, surprised the Saxons in the siege of Segeberg, and his unexpected appearance once more renewed their professions of loyalty. The fortifications of Erisberg were restored. New forts were constructed along the Leap. An assembly of the barbarous chiefs was holden at Paderborn, in Westphalia, and Charles, having received their homage, prepared at the solicitation of Ibn al-Arabi, Lord of Saragossa, to march into Spain and to restore the suppliant Emir. Now we're heading into Spain. The authority of the exiled Arabian was restored by the prowess of the Christian monarch, who reduced Pampeluna, traversed the Ebro, and successfully invested the city of Saragossa. The rebellious followers of Christ and Mahomet, were impartially punished by the defender of insulted sovereignty. And the March of Spain, which the victor instituted, extended from the Pyrenees to the river Ebro. Barcelona was the residence of a French governor. He obtained the counties of Roussillon and Catalonia, and the kingdoms of Navarre and Aragon were subject to his jurisdiction. But on his return, his rear guard was attacked and defeated in the Pyrenean mountains. And this action, which had been so much celebrated in romance for the death of the famous Roland, seems to impeach the military skill and prudence of Charles. The return of Witikind, a Saxon chef, well, we'll call him not a chef, a chief. The Saxon chief, who had twice retired from the victorious arms of Charles to the friendly court of Denmark, again roused the latent spark of independence. Oh, so I now have a cat meowing. So he roused the latent spark of independence in the martial bosoms of his countrymen. No, they wanted to be independent. They advanced as far as the Rhine, ravaged the whole country from Duitz to Koblenz, plundering the churches, burning the monasteries, violating the sacred persons of the nuns, and putting all who fell in their way to the sword, without distinction of age or sex. Charles was at Auxerre when he received intelligence of this new revolt. Good heavens! He immediately dispatched such troops as were nearest the frontier in search of the enemy, whom they came up with at the place called Lihifi, situated on the banks of the Eder, in the Principality of Hesse. Yes, so Hesse is still known today. The battle was obstinate and bloody, but victory at length decided in favour of the French, who, in revenge of the excesses committed by the barbarians on the Rhine, gave no quarter, but left the whole army dead on the field.